Something shifts in a woman's eyes when she realizes she has been performing her entire life. Not performing in the theatrical sense, but living according to an invisible script written by voices that were never hers. She wakes up one morning in her carefully curated apartment, surrounded by evidence of a life that looks successful from every angle and feels nothing. Not sadness exactly, not depression, just a vast emptiness where she expected fulfillment to be. This is the moment Jung called the confrontation with the self, when the ego's carefully constructed reality begins to crack and something deeper starts pressing through. For modern women, this moment often arrives disguised as burnout, as a relationship that finally crumbles, as a promotion that feels hollow, or simply as an inexplicable restlessness that no amount of achievement can satisfy. She has done everything right according to the manual she absorbed through cultural osmosis. She educated herself, built a career, maintained her appearance, stayed productive, remained positive, kept growing, kept improving, kept climbing toward a summit that seems to recede with every step. And yet here she is, successful by every external measure, feeling like a stranger in her own skin. The women around her seem to be playing the same game. Coffee conversations revolve around optimization, how to be more efficient, more disciplined, more focused. They share productivity hacks and morning routines, compare workout regimens and career strategies, post aesthetically pleasing glimpses of lives that look enviable but feel increasingly performative. Everyone is running towards something or away from something, but nobody seems to be arriving anywhere that matters. What none of them discuss is the exhaustion that lives beneath the performance. The way their nervous systems are constantly activated, always alert, perpetually preparing for the next challenge or crisis. The way they've learned to override their body's signals for rest, to push through fatigue, to treat their physical and emotional needs as obstacles to overcome, rather than information to honor. Jung understood that modern life creates a particular kind of suffering. Not the suffering of lack or deprivation, but the suffering of disconnection from the archetypal patterns that give life meaning. When we live entirely in the ego's domain, pursuing goals defined by collective values rather than individual soul, we achieve things that don't nourish us. We become successful in ways that leave us empty. This emptiness isn't a personal failing. It's a symptom of a deeper problem, one that runs through the entire structure of contemporary existence. We've built a world that values speed over depth, productivity over presence, achievement over authenticity. And women, in their effort to claim equal space in this world, have often had to adopt its values, wholesale, becoming more masculine in energy, more driven, more disconnected from the cyclical, intuitive, receptive aspects of their nature. The artificial light of this world never dims. There's always another level to reach, another version of yourself to become, another goal to pursue. Social media provides an endless stream of others who seem to be doing it better, looking better, living better. The comparison is constant and corrosive, creating a perpetual sense of not enough, even as you accomplish more than any previous generation of women could have imagined. She lies awake at 3 a.m, scrolling through her phone, seeing carefully curated glimpses of other lives, feeling simultaneously stimulated and depleted. Her body is tired, but her mind won't settle. She's lost the ability to simply be, to exist without consuming or producing or optimizing. Even her rest has become strategic, calculated for maximum recovery, so she can perform better tomorrow. This is what it means to live under artificial light, to lose connection with natural rhythms, with the ebb and flow of energy that characterized human existence for millennia. Women's bodies especially are designed for cyclical living, for periods of outward action followed by inward retreat, for expansion and contraction, for doing and being. But the modern world demands constant output, linear progress, perpetual availability. The cost of this disconnection shows up in ways both obvious and subtle. Hormonal imbalances, autoimmune conditions, anxiety disorders, insomnia, a general sense of being wired and tired simultaneously. But beyond the physical symptoms lies something harder to name, a spiritual malaise, a feeling of being fundamentally out of alignment with something essential but forgotten. When a woman begins to sense that something is wrong, her first instinct is often to try harder at the same game. She assumes the problem is her execution, not the underlying program. So she adds more practices to her routine, reads more self-help books, takes more courses, follows more influencers promising the key to fulfillment. She keeps looking outside herself for answers to questions that can only be resolved within. This is where Jung's concept of individuation becomes not just interesting, but necessary. Individuation is the process of uncovering who you actually are beneath the layers of conditioning, expectation, and adaptation. It's an archaeological dig through the sediment of your psyche, carefully brushing away what was imposed to reveal what was always there. But this process doesn't begin with addition. It begins with subtraction, with questioning every should that governs your life, with examining the beliefs you've never thought to question because they seemed self-evident, with noticing the ways you've shaped yourself to fit into spaces that were never designed for your actual dimensions. She starts to notice patterns she's been running for years without awareness. The way she automatically says yes to requests, even when she wants to say no. The way she performs enthusiasm in situations that actually drain her. The way she's learned to be accommodating, agreeable, low maintenance, easy. The way she monitors herself constantly, adjusting her behavior based on how she imagines others perceive her. These adaptations made sense once. They were survival strategies, ways of navigating a world that often punishes women for taking up space, for having needs, for prioritizing themselves. But strategies that once protected her have become a prison. She's so good at being what others need that she's lost touch with what she needs. She's so practiced at reading and responding to external cues that her internal compass has atrophied. Jung believed that within the unconscious lies not just personal history, but archetypal wisdom, patterns and symbols that connect individual experience to something universal and timeless. When a woman begins the process of individuation, she's not just discovering her personal preferences and quirks. She's connecting with deeper currents of feminine experience, with ways of being that existed before patriarchy, capitalism, and social media distorted them. This connection doesn't happen through thinking. The rational mind, the one that's been running the show, is part of the problem. It's been trained to value certain things and dismiss others, to prioritize productivity over intuition, logic over feeling, certainty over mystery. Real transformation requires engaging with parts of the psyche that don't speak in words, that communicate through images, sensations, dreams, and subtle knowing. She begins to pay attention to what her body has been trying to tell her, the tension in her jaw that appears when she's saying yes, but meaning no, the heaviness in her chest during activities she thinks she should enjoy, the way certain people leave her feeling depleted, while others somehow replenish her energy. Her body has been speaking this language all along. She just learned to override it, to treat it as unreliable, to privilege thought over felt sense. Dreams become important in this phase, not interpreted through generic dream dictionaries, but engaged with as personal mythology, as messages from parts of herself that have no other way to communicate. She starts keeping a journal by her bed, recording the strange narratives her unconscious creates each night. Patterns emerge, recurring symbols, emotional themes. A woman she keeps encountering who feels both familiar and unknown. A house with rooms she's never explored, water that's sometimes clear and sometimes murky. Jung spent years studying his own dreams, treating them as sacred texts that revealed what his conscious mind couldn't grasp. He encouraged his patients to do the same, to approach their inner world with the same curiosity and respect they'd give to any important relationship. Because that's what individuation is, developing a relationship with the totality of who you are, not just the parts deemed acceptable or valuable by external standards. This archaeological process is slow and often uncomfortable. You uncover beliefs that have shaped your entire life without your knowing. You realize how much of your personality is performance, how many of your desires are actually borrowed from others, how little you know about what you actually want when freed from the pressure to want the right things. There's grief in this discovery. Grief for the years spent pursuing goals that weren't yours. Grief for the relationships maintained at the cost of authenticity. Grief for all the times you abandoned yourself to keep the peace, or win approval, or avoid rejection. This grief needs space. It needs to be felt, not fixed, not rushed through, not immediately transformed into lessons learned or silver linings found. At some point in the individuation process, things fall apart, not as a failure, but as a necessary dismantling. The structures you've built your life upon begin to crack. Relationships that once felt solid reveal their foundations. Career paths that seemed inevitable start to feel arbitrary. Plans you made with certainty suddenly seem questionable. This isn't because you're doing something wrong. It's because you're finally doing something right. Jung called this the dark night of the soul, though he knew it by older names from alchemy and mysticism. It's the negredo, the blackening, when everything must be broken down before it can be reconstituted in truer form. The ego experiences this as catastrophe. The self knows it as transformation. She might find herself unable to show up for activities that once defined her. The career she built with such determination feels meaningless. The social circle she carefully cultivated feels superficial. The relationship she thought was solid reveals its cracks under the pressure of her changing. Everything she worked to create seems to be crumbling, and the terror is that nothing will replace it, that she'll be left with absence rather than presence. This is the phase where many women panic and try to rebuild the old structures. They recommit to the path they were on. They double down on the identity they've been performing. They convince themselves that the discomfort is just a phase, that they need to push through it, that stability is more important than authenticity. And sometimes they succeed at this reconstruction, but the cracks remain. The knowing doesn't unknow itself. They've seen behind the curtain, and pretending becomes harder each day. The braver path, the one Jung advocated, is to allow the dissolution, to resist the urge to immediately fill the void with new structures, new plans, new versions of yourself, to sit in the uncertainty and let it teach you, to trust that when the false falls away, what remains will be more real, more aligned, more yours. This phase feels like death because it is a kind of death. The death of who you thought you were. The death of the future you imagined. The death of your certainty about how life should unfold. But death in the psychological sense isn't an ending. It's a transformation. The caterpillar doesn't become the butterfly by trying harder at being a caterpillar. It dissolves completely, becomes formless, and from that formlessness emerges something entirely different. She stops knowing who she is. The easy answers don't work anymore. When someone asks what she's passionate about, she draws a blank. When opportunities arise that would have excited her before, she feels nothing. She's in the liminal space, the threshold between what was and what will be, and there's no rushing this passage. The psyche has its own timeline, its own wisdom about how long the dissolving needs to take. Jung encouraged his patients to engage actively with this darkness rather than simply enduring it. To paint it, write it, move it, express it in whatever forms felt true. Not to make meaning from it or find the lesson, but to give it form, to relate to it as something alive rather than something to be solved. The unconscious speaks in symbols and images. When you meet it in that language, transformation happens in ways the rational mind can't orchestrate. Her dreams during this period become more vivid, more emotionally intense. She dreams of buildings collapsing, of being lost in unfamiliar cities, of searching for something she can't name. These aren't nightmares to be feared, but messages to be received. Her psyche is processing the dissolution, making space for what's emerging, clearing ground that's been cluttered with outdated beliefs and inherited expectations. The people in her life often don't understand this phase. They want her to be who she was. They offer well-meaning advice about staying positive, about not making rash decisions, about waiting until she feels more stable. But this instability is the point. You can't transform while clinging to stability. You can't become new while maintaining all the old structures. Something has to give, and often what gives is the comfort of certainty, the illusion of control, the fantasy that you can change without anything actually changing. From the ashes of dissolution, something begins to stir. Not a return to what was, but an emergence of what's always been waiting beneath the conditioning. This is where individuation shifts from breaking down to building up. But what's being built is fundamentally different from what crumbled. It's not constructed from external blueprints. It rises from an internal knowing that has its own intelligence, its own direction, its own truth. The first sign is often a whisper of genuine desire. Not the desires she's been taught to have, not the goals that look good on paper, but something more primal and less explainable. A sudden urge to learn something impractical, an inexplicable pull toward a place she's never been. A feeling of rightness when she imagines a possibility she's never seriously considered. These whispers are easy to dismiss as whims or fantasies, but Jung would say they're the self beginning to speak, offering guidance toward wholeness. She starts to notice what actually energizes her versus what she thinks should energize her. The distinction becomes clearer. Some activities leave her feeling alive and aligned even when they're challenging. Others drain her even when they're objectively pleasant. She's discovering her actual constitution, her unique energetic signature, the particular way her soul wants to express itself in the world. This isn't about finding her passion in the way that phrase is usually meant. It's more subtle and more significant. It's about attuning to an internal yes and no that operates below the level of thought. Her body knows before her mind can articulate. A certain conversation makes her feel expansive. A particular environment helps her breathe more deeply. Some activities create a sense of flow, while others require constant effort to maintain focus. Jung believed each person has a unique calling, not in the sense of a single career or role, but as a particular way of being that feels most authentic to their nature. This calling can't be determined through analysis or comparison. It reveals itself through attention, through noticing what draws you, not because you should be drawn, but because you are drawn, for reasons that might not make logical sense. She begins to trust this inner compass more than external validation. A major shift occurs when she realizes that other people's approval or disapproval doesn't actually tell her anything about whether she's on the right path. The metrics she's used to measure her worth, success, desirability, value start to feel arbitrary. Not because achievement doesn't matter, but because achievement disconnected from authentic desire is just sophisticated self-abandonment. The woman in this phase starts making choices that confuse the people around her. She might step back from opportunities others would consider foolish to decline. She might pursue interests that seem irrelevant to her established identity. She might end relationships that look functional from the outside, but feel deadening from within. To observers, these choices might appear self-sabotaging. To her, they feel like self-preservation. This is where Jung's concept of the anima becomes particularly relevant for women. Though he originally described the anima as the feminine aspect within men, the deeper principle applies universally. It's the soul image, the part of you that knows who you truly are beneath all adaptation. For women reclaiming their authentic nature, this means reconnecting with aspects of femininity that aren't performance, aspects that exist prior to and independent of the male gaze, the market's demands, or society's expectations. She discovers that her authentic femininity might not look like what she's been taught femininity should be. Maybe she's not naturally nurturing in the expected ways. Maybe she's not soft-spoken or accommodating. Maybe her sexuality doesn't fit neat categories. Maybe her life trajectory doesn't follow traditional milestones. These discoveries aren't failures. They're liberations. She's meeting herself as she actually is, rather than as she's supposed to be. Dreams in this phase often feature symbols of emergence: seeds sprouting, butterflies, babies being born, doors opening to reveal beautiful rooms. These aren't wish fulfillment. They're the psyche recognizing its own transformation, celebrating the new life taking form. She wakes from these dreams with a feeling she can't quite name, something between hope and homecoming. The challenge now is honoring what's emerging without rushing to crystallize it into a new fixed identity. The ego wants certainty. It wants to know who you're becoming, so it can start building structures around that identity. But premature structure will just create another cage. The wisdom is to stay fluid, to follow the unfolding without insisting it take a particular form or arrive at a predetermined destination. As authentic desires emerge, so do the parts of herself she spent years denying. Jung called this the shadow, but it's not inherently dark or evil. It's simply everything you've decided you're not allowed to be. For women, the shadow often contains strength that was too threatening, anger that was too unfeminine, ambition that was too aggressive, sexuality that was too bold, or conversely, softness that seemed too weak, needs that felt too demanding, emotions that appeared too messy. She begins to notice the aspects of others that trigger her most intensely. The woman who speaks her mind without apology. The one who prioritizes her own needs without guilt. the one who expresses anger cleanly, the one who's unapologetically ambitious, the one who's soft without being weak. These aren't random irritations. They're mirrors reflecting what she's rejected in herself, showing her precisely what wants to be reclaimed. Jung taught that shadow work isn't about becoming a better person. It's about becoming a whole person. This means acknowledging that you contain contradictions, that you're capable of things you've judged as wrong, that you have impulses and desires that don't fit your self-image. The goal isn't to act on every impulse, but to stop using so much energy to repress them, to bring them into consciousness where they can be integrated, rather than letting them operate from the shadows where they control you without your awareness. She starts to experiment with expressing shadow qualities in small ways, speaking a truth she would have previously suppressed, saying no without elaborate justification, expressing frustration instead of swallowing it, allowing herself to want something without immediately talking herself out of it. These small acts feel enormous because they're challenging a lifetime of conditioning about who she's allowed to be. The shadow also contains positive qualities she's disowned. Maybe she's always seen herself as practical and dismissed her creativity. Maybe she's identified as serious and rejected her playfulness. Maybe she's claimed independence and denied her desire for deep connection. Whatever she's insisted she's not, that's where her shadow work needs to focus. The goal is range, the capacity to access different aspects of herself, depending on what the moment requires, rather than being locked into a narrow band of acceptable expression. Her relationships begin to shift as she integrates shadow material. People who are attracted to her performance may feel uncomfortable with her authenticity. Dynamics based on her playing certain roles start to feel unstable. This can be painful, but it's also clarifying. She starts to see which relationships have space for her wholeness and which ones require her to stay small, edited, or false. New relationships form on different foundations. She's no longer attracting people based on her persona, the mask she wears for the world. She's meeting people who respond to her actual nature, who appreciate qualities she used to hide. These connections feel different, less performative, more easeful. She doesn't have to maintain an image. She can relax into being rather than constantly doing the work of appearing. Jung believed that shadow integration is necessary for genuine relationship. When you are trying to be only your light, only your acceptable qualities, you can't truly be known. Intimacy requires showing the parts you're not proud of, the aspects that don't fit the narrative of who you'd like to be. This vulnerability creates the possibility for real connection rather than just mutual admiration of carefully curated personas. She discovers that her shadow often holds the exact medicine she's been seeking. The anger she was afraid to feel contains her boundaries. The selfishness she was taught to despise contains her self-preservation. The darkness she tried to transcend contains her depth. Rather than being obstacles to overcome, these rejected aspects are gateways to wholeness, keys to reclaiming dimensions of herself that have been waiting in exile. This integration doesn't happen through force or positive thinking. It requires a certain gentleness, a willingness to meet yourself without judgment, to acknowledge what is without immediately trying to change it. The shadow retreats when pursued, but reveals itself when approached with curiosity and acceptance. She learns to notice her triggers not as problems, but as invitations, as the psyche's way of saying, "Here, look here, there's something important you've been avoiding." The culmination of individuation isn't arriving at a final form, but discovering how to live from your center, from the self, rather than the ego. This center doesn't eliminate challenges or guarantee happiness. It provides orientation, a reference point that helps you navigate life's complexity without losing yourself in the process. You stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What does my deepest nature require in this moment?" She notices she's less reactive. Events that would have destabilized her before still trigger emotional responses. But there's something underneath that remains steady. Not because she's become emotionally detached, but because she's more rooted in something that doesn't fluctuate with circumstances. Jung called this the transcendent function, the capacity to hold tension between opposites without collapsing into one pole or the other. Life becomes less about achieving goals and more about expressing essence. She still has ambitions and desires, but they arise from a different place. Not from proving her worth or filling an internal void, but from the natural overflow of who she is. Her work becomes less about building an impressive resume and more about contributing in ways that feel aligned. Her relationships become less about securing validation and more about genuine exchange. She develops a different relationship with time. The frantic urgency that once drove her eases. Not because she becomes lazy or unmotivated, but because she's no longer trying to outrun herself, no longer using achievement to avoid feeling, no longer believing that if she just does enough, she'll finally be enough. This doesn't mean abandoning discipline or commitment. It means those qualities serve her actual values rather than unconscious wounds. The practices that support this way of living are simple, but require consistency. Daily time in stillness, whether meditation or simply sitting without distraction. Regular engagement with creative expression, not for product, but for process. Physical movement that connects her to her body's wisdom rather than treating it as a machine to optimize. Time in nature, which reminds her of rhythms slower and deeper than human anxiety. She learns to recognize when she's drifting from center and has tools to return. Certain situations pull her back into old patterns. Particular people trigger defensive responses. Specific circumstances activate familiar wounds. But now she notices these dynamics more quickly. She can choose her response rather than being at the mercy of unconscious reactions. This is freedom, not from difficulty, but from being controlled by unexamined patterns. Jung said, "Individuation makes you more yourself, and therefore more universal." The more you discover your authentic nature, the more you recognize it in others. The more you accept your complexity, the more space you have for others' complexity. The more you integrate your shadow, the less you project it onto the world. You become both more unique and more connected, more individual and more part of the collective. Her presence changes. People notice something different, though they might not be able to name it. She's more grounded, more genuine, less defended. Conversations with her go deeper more quickly because she's not maintaining a performance. She can hold space for complexity, for contradiction, for the full range of human experience. She doesn't need others to be a certain way for her to be okay. This doesn't mean she's achieved some perfect state. Individuation is lifelong. New layers reveal themselves. New challenges arise that require deeper integration. But she has a relationship with the process now. She knows how to listen to her dreams, how to notice her projections, how to sit with discomfort until it reveals its wisdom. She's learned to trust that her psyche is always working toward wholeness, even when the path isn't clear. The woman living from center stops asking whether she's doing life right and starts trusting her unique unfolding. She measures success not by external achievements, but by internal alignment. She defines fulfillment not through comparison, but through felt sense. She knows that her path won't look like anyone else's because it isn't meant to. Her life becomes an expression of her particular essence, rather than an attempt to fit a universal template. This is what Jung meant by individuation, not becoming special, but becoming specifically yourself, and in doing so, living more fully, more freely, more truly than any performance could ever allow.